Want to follow along? I'll be reading in the Common English version. So Proverbs verse 8. Before so, let's say a prayer. Growing up, my pastor would always say, if you want, you can put your hand over your heart and pray. So let's pray. God, I ask that you would open our hearts and our minds, that we might hear from you and understand you and ourselves and our world in new ways. Amen. So we'll all listen to the verse, and then you can self-select to what station you want to go to, right? This is wisdom speaking. The Lord created me at the beginning, before anything long was past. I was formed in ancient times at the beginning, before the earth was. When there was no watery depths, I was brought forth, when there were no springs flowing with water. Before the mountains were settled, before the hills, I was brought forth, before God made the earth and the fields, or the first of the dry land. I was there when God established the heavens, when God marked out the horizon on the deep sea, when God thickened the clouds above, when God secured the fountains of the deep, when God set a limit for the sea so the water couldn't go beyond God's command, when God marked out the earth's foundations. I was beside God as a master of crafts. I was having fun, smiling before God all the time, frolicking with God's inhabited earth and delighting in the human race. The word of the Lord. If you'd like to stay here, we're going to discuss holy wisdom, and I'll ask you to come forward. If you'd like to go interact with the story in room number 1, you'll make puppets and talk about holy wisdom with God at the beginning, talking about creating the world. Or if you'd like to go to the Octagon, you're drawing. All of those things are set out. It will be fun. And we're keeping time, so in 25 minutes, everyone returns. I'm going to start us off by just talking a little bit of some of the things I've been thinking, and then I'll kick out a discussion and we can talk to one another. But I was listening to a podcast recently from, I listen to On Being a lot. I actually listen to a lot of podcasts, and I have one if you're interested. It's very good. But I listened to On Being with Krista Tippett. She's, President Obama gave her an award for being a fantastic interviewer, actually, right? So she was interviewing Frank Wilczek, who is a professor of physics at MIT. And he has a recent book, it's called The Beautiful Question, right? Which actually, it's not the beautiful question, it's the beautiful question. So the question of beauty is kind of what his book is about. So he is kind of groundbreaking. He has a Nobel Peace Award, or a Nobel Award as well, in quantum physics. And so he was inspired by his intuition, actually, to look for a deeper order of beauty in nature. In fact, every major advance in his career came from his intuition to assume that the universe embodies beautiful forms, forms whose hallmarks are symmetry, harmony, balance, proportion, and economy. Right? So he essentially, in the interview at some point, he said, listen, when I and my colleagues are sitting around, we're trying to figure out what equation works for this or that in the universe, right? Math, like physicists are really into math, which I'm not into math, right? But my son is a physicist, and so like, he loves how beautiful math is, right? And he'll get me going to have to listen to him about how beautiful math is, right? And so because he's my son, right? And he, like, you learn what your kids want you to learn, right? So this actually was Joe texting me saying, you have to listen to this podcast. And so I listened to the podcast because my son said, listen to the podcast, right? So it's talking about how equations are beautiful, right? If you think back, like, there is something nice when you can figure something out, right? 2 + 2 = 4. It's always going to equal 4, right? It's nice. Like, it's comforting, right? And I think that's part of what they mean by balance. This guy, Frank Wilczek, says when his colleagues are together and they can't figure out an equation and they just want to start somewhere, right? So they're essentially guessing to start and then they can tweak around. He says we pick the most beautiful equation we can come up with and we're almost always right. Like, the more beautiful they make it, the more symmetrical they make it, the more harmonious they make it, the more proportional they make it, the more economical they make it, right? If they make it simpler and efficient, it's almost always right. That's fascinating to me, right? So, because of this balance, proportion, and harmony, right? That's what I want to think about with Lady Wisdom, or Holy Wisdom, walking with God in the beginning, right? It's personified, right? It's not. This doesn't have to be factual, right? It's a myth. It's one of our Christian myths, or Hebrew myths. So you have this picture of God, whatever that is, with wisdom, whatever that is, walking together and working together. My brother, when he was like 4 or 5, 3 or 4 or 5, used to, for a very small period of time, my parents owned a retreat center in New York. And so, you know, my dad was always like fixing things because that's what you do when you own a retreat center. So my brother would come around and just like stand above him, you know, and then, you know, my dad would turn around and be like, "What you doing, Dave?" And Dave would say, "Just checking." Just checking, right? So like this part of the picture, I see Holy Wisdom, right? Like as God's creating or whatever the creation is happening, that you have this wisdom, like kind of over God's shoulder going, just checking, just making sure it's balanced and proportional and harmonious and efficient, economical, right? So, I want to get the discussion going. Where do you see, when you look at the world, where do you see harmony or proportion or economy? Balance. Where do you see that in the world?
When you look at the sky, the stars, and actually the whole planets and plants and the sea, everything is all balanced. And God created the world. I find the balance there.
Yeah.
That's me.
Where else? Where do you see harmony or proportion or balance or
The seasons.
the seasons? Yeah. Especially for those of us who live when we get to have 4 seasons, right? It's like a switch got turned yesterday, right? It's fall. Let's hope for 3 more months of it.
Oh, that'd be
Yeah.
nice.
What else? Where else do you see proportion or balance or economy?
In ourselves and in animals, because when you look at the form of these organisms, it's usually that, you know, they're bilateral symmetry. One side mirrors the other.
Yeah. Where do you see?
I guess friends and family.
Yeah. How we make relationships with one another, right? That's part of kind of the natural course of the world, that we balance one another and find harmony together.
Think of the cliche, opposites attract.
Yeah.
Night and day, dark and light, life and death.
Yeah, there is this like incredible balance, right? Even the scale feels. I think that's what I really love about the equinox, right? A couple days ago, that there's this like perfect symmetry of the day, right? Just as much light as there is of dark. Oh. Today? I thought it was
Yes.
no, it was Thursday.
Yeah.
I had it marked because I
It
wanted
wasn't
to go out
exactly
and
the same amount of light and day. I mean, I looked at my cell phone
Oh, really?
this morning.
So it
and
like,
was-
it goes, yeah,
said
yeah,
the
yeah,
sunrise
it's getting
and
there
sunset are at the exact same time.
today.
Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, so the sun, so with the sun
According
too,
to
not just the light of
Apple.
day, but how the sun moves, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In nature, there's so much interdependency that, you know, every things that happen with trees affect the squirrels, and the things happen with squirrels affect it. And it's just, everything's connected.
Yeah. Yeah, I went into like chaos theory a little bit a couple weeks ago, or Storm Sunday, and someone said, I didn't really go into it, but I just mentioned it, the idea that things, like something happens here and it affects over here, and it can be a small thing that affects, makes a big thing, or a big thing that affects a small thing. Yeah. So tell me, what is wisdom? How would you guys define wisdom? You would define it with great difficulty? What's the difference between wisdom and understanding? How about that?
The depth of it.
The depth of it?
I think with wisdom, there's some element of revelation, like self-revelation, or you learn something rather than something that's there, static. There's some action involved.
Right, so it's not just information.
Right.
Yeah, I would think that the difference is it comes from two different places. That wisdom generally comes from your head, comes from either an inherent knowledge or a learned knowledge, where understanding comes from your heart.
And all that comes from God is the one that gives that wisdom from your heart.
All right, so now we're,
Yes,
yes, so
God.
we're adding God to
God
the
is
mix.
this top wisdom.
So that wisdom somehow includes God.
That-
Knowing what to say to others.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Knowing what to say to others.
Knowing what to say. So,
Or not to say.
yeah, so wisdom to you is, now we're defining like what does wisdom do? When we have it, what good is it? In other words, right? It helps us know what to say, when to say it. How else is wisdom helpful?
To me, wisdom is with discernment, and it comes from the Holy Spirit, which is different than knowledge.
Right, yep, so wisdom comes with discernment through the Holy Spirit, which is different than knowledge. At some point, I heard someone define wisdom as information plus time, I think, right? So, or understanding plus time. How else has wisdom helped you? How about we go there? How has wisdom helped?
I see wisdom as guidance and also
Yeah.
planning.
Planning. Yeah. Yeah.
Understanding.
How to understand. Yeah. Yeah.
Solving the difference between action and reaction.
No kidding. The difference between action and reaction, right? Or even just like responding instead of reacting, right? How do I act right, say right, do right? Decision making. Yeah.
Patience.
Patience. Yeah, wisdom, it gives us patience, or especially just even the act of waiting on wisdom. It requires patience.
Perseverance. Perseverance.
Wisdom gives us perseverance through things.
Good about making decisions.
How to make decisions.
Faith, I think wisdom is our faith. You have to have faith to have wisdom.
So there's some kind of connection or relationship between faith and wisdom.
Patience.
Same way
Patience.
There's a connection
Time,
between
long
wisdom
term, yeah.
and patience. Wisdom and patience. Yeah. If you're, I don't, you don't have to, but I'd be interested if there is a moment in your life that you remembered you really needed wisdom and you asked for it. Something that you're willing to share. Yeah, Julia.
Talking to my sister right after she tried to commit suicide.
Yeah. How do I say, when do I say, where do I say it? Do I say it? Yeah. Which then, that would require, wisdom would have to change our heart too, right? So wisdom has a place of healing then in our own lives, and a change of our understanding of things so that we can then walk into someone else's experience and talk about it.
Probably like most parents, I think there's that moment when you sit with your kids and you listen to some of the things that they talk about, some of the things that they're feeling. And it's like you've gone back 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And you think, oh my God, how are they experiencing the same things that I did? And remembering how painful it was, how difficult it was. And it takes wisdom to sort of listen, not give too much advice, understand that it's something that they have to kind of work their way through, but also to color with the wisdom and the life experiences that you've been through, to try to help them understand that it might only be temporary. That sometimes life seems unfair, people seem cruel, or sometimes your heart gets broken, but you just kind of have to walk them through it and be there for them.
Yeah. So if, I don't know if you guys can all hear, but he's talking about parenting and watching your kids go through something very similar to what you've gone through. And so how do you offer the wisdom you've gotten, listen to where they let them have their own experiences, not tainted too much, but tainted some, and
Encouraging and helping others.
Any other experiences of times where you knew you needed wisdom? Yeah. When did you need wisdom?
Yesterday, when I was with my friend in the ICU, he was really freaked out, but I was holding his hand, and I had a feeling that we were communicating. The whole quantum physics thing, and he's in a very difficult family environment, and some of the family was there, some weren't there, they were in and out. And what should I say or not say or do, or should I even say that I believe that I'm communicating with him? And it would seem like talking about it now, it's sort of so or a common thing, but during the time of when that was going on, it just seemed like that God would let me make the right decision and let me help them make the right decision in the context of he's in an environment where he had a heart transplant and they have no facilities in this hospital to deal with someone who had a heart transplant. So he's not getting MRIs, he's not getting tests, he's not getting this.
Right.
So do I say, let's move him? I have no authority to do that. Or do I go to his wife and say, hey, let me help you?
Yeah.
Or do I keep my mouth shut and let them do what's...
Right.
And that's
I think anytime we find ourselves, like, particularly in a hospital, right, with something that's out of our control, right? So many things happen out of our control. But when we're faced with it, to know what to do, that we seem to seek wisdom. So let me ask you this. How do you do it? How do you seek wisdom? What do you do specifically?
Pray.
Do you use words?
Sometimes.
Sometimes you use words, sometimes not. Right? How do you do it?
take a deep breath
Uh-huh.
and you sort of, you're thinking,
Yeah.
sort of think out loud, say, "What, help me." You know, and you sort of look up at the big entity in the sky and say, help me make the right call, or help me do the right thing.
Yeah, so there's this big breath. I referred to this woman's work several times, I know I have, so I apologize for repeating myself, but her last name is Lorman, and she's at Harvard. She's an anthropologist, I think, or maybe a sociologist. I think anthropologist. Anyway, she studied evangelical churches and how they pray just in the last decade or 10 years. And so her book is called When God Talks Back. And so I've read from it before. The book is fascinating to me, and I'll be honest, I always stop at the same spot when I got to it because I'm still thinking, clearly, because I keep referring to it, I keep thinking about this one section. And she essentially argues that when we are raised as people of faith and raised to pray, right, to an invisible thing, right? So, and she went very lovingly. She didn't go like to prove that people are crazy who pray, right? She went like to figure out what is this that people do when they pray, right? She said that when we've raised our children, or when we ourselves practice praying, we have engaged our mind to speak to itself, to imagine the right way to think, and what answers work and don't work, right? Now, I know that on some level somehow sounds like she's taking the mystical out of it, right? And I don't want to do that. I just want us to think about the idea of having a conversation in your head, right? So for those of us of faith, we imagine having conversations with God. It's happening in our head. Sometimes those things like come out of nowhere and you're like, oh, that's totally wise, and that was from God, and thank you, Jesus, right? But a lot of the time, it's us having a conversation in our mind, right? And so her study determined that people who had engaged in this prayer thing of imagining conversation, going back and forth with what wisdom or not wisdom or questions and answers, that we are better at making decisions than people who have not practiced this. Which makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, it makes a lot of sense. But I had never had so much like gratitude for my parents teaching me to pray until I read that part of the book, because I thought, my God, my parents taught me to do this from before I had words, you know? Taught me the value of having things converse back and forth, right? Which is that picture of holy wisdom with the Creator, right? That I was with God, so that there's two entities going, I'll put a tree right here, and holy wisdom saying, maybe not that kind of tree, because it's not going to grow in Florida. I know that that's ridiculous, right? Just create like a ridiculous scenario, except that that's wisdom, right? Like that is the action of wisdom happening. How wisdom forms is through like conversations or things over and against one another. There's this answer, question, answer. They're coming back, right?
I think some of it, I was going to say before, the way I prepare for wisdom is by sort of listening to other people or to sort of following other people that I think are smart. But as you began to talk about that, I thought that really the way that wisdom comes to me, and a lot of times in my role in this church and before I was even the music director, was that I was always amazed that sometimes that without Beth and I talking, things would fall into place. The songs I would have chosen to do worked perfectly well with the sermon that we were preaching. And I think that part of that is because it's allowing myself to be in a place where I don't bring in the baggage, where I don't bring in that raincoat that protects me, or come into an argument with also a preconceived notion, that I allow myself to just be kind of neutral.
Yeah.
And at that point, you hear the different sides, and you're able to sort of receive them, process them, and then act on them, as Sam said, to act rather than just react. Yeah. And if that's for some people, they would say that that's prayer.
Yeah.
That's
absolutely. Conversation between us, because we assume God is with us.
But it's also just the moment to just sit neutral, and at those moments, I think, are when I really truly believe that there's a God who talks to me. And He may not do it in words, He may not do it, in something written, but there's just something that He talks to me in the way that He rules my life.
So I see that the art people are back, right? Were you the Vincent Van Gogh people? Tell me about it. So share what happened a little bit, and then when the puppet people come back, we'll ask them to share too. So the puppet people.
Where do they come now?
They're going to make their puppets as well.
So seriously, someone tell me a learning or something that struck you. Yeah.
So we have to be creative. And for me, wisdom puts order into chaos. So there's three colors and then it puts order. So sometimes when things are chaotic, I seek wisdom to figure out stuff. So it was fun.
So for me, the painting was the Vincent Van Gogh Starry Night, and it was interactive. So the man was touching the painting and everything started to move. and grow. And I think for me, and this is just, we're all just doodling here, but it's the idea of things are always changing and the flowing. And that, for me, that's the wisdom that in my life that I'm trying to listen to, that nothing is static, which can be chaotic sometimes. But as I go with the flow, it makes things easier. You know, if I try to just keep my heart and my mind open to what is God calling me to do, or be just try to keep it flow.
Someone else? Look at you. You did the tree.
Yeah, well, the tree seems to me the idea of being down firm, where the earth and the skies and the stars with his strokes showed the movement, and it didn't have to interact for me to see that these above us there's always something moving, and in the dark, even the silence of the night, the city down below was there in the dark, and it was just, it made my heart feel good.
Yeah, right? That's great. How about a couple people from the discussion? Why don't you share one of your learnings, and then we'll ask some of the puppet folks what's happened too. So, someone who stayed in here, what's one thing we talked about? That boring, huh?
We talked about wisdom versus knowledge. That's how we started. How are they different?
Yeah.
Anything else?
And wisdom is from God.
Yeah.
God is,
Yeah, the way that God is part of wisdom. What's the difference between understanding and wisdom, information and wisdom?
Oh gosh, I'd love to know what you figured out.
Yeah.
really good.
We also talked about how we go about obtaining wisdom.
Yeah, we talked about our individual experiences.
Talking about what role prayer works in that process.
How about from the puppet people? Someone tell us how you want to show us what you got?
Wow.
Stand right here so
Here,
people can see.
yeah.
Yeah.
We're gonna do this so everybody can see you.
Oh.
That point.
Nice.
Hi. Do they have names?
Remember their names? Wisdom and the seeker.
Wisdom and the seeker. So you had a conversation between wisdom and the seeker? Is that how it worked? Yeah? Someone else tell me the experience. What was it like?
It was awesome. The kids had a great time. This is wisdom, and she says, I was with God in the beginning.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Hello. What's your name? That's fantastic. Lovely eyes, too. So it was a conversation between wisdom and the seeker. Fantastic. Last week we learned, was that where So we just share our learning with each other. Last week we learned a song, and so we're going to do that again as passing the peace. And so I say to you, peace be with you.
Also with you.
We're going to sing this song as we pass the